Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining in for this Wednesday afternoon show as we follow Laura Afonso's 3 o'clock food show, where she just had some sandwiches in the studio. And Bob, what
Yes,
come
I
you?
just eaten 45 of them, but I'm going to take 5 statin pills to offset the effect.
Did it not look fantastic?
Oh, it was great. They're criminally rich, though, really rich.
Looked like some good
I'm
sandwiches.
going to have to go get liposuction and some kind of a spa treatment.
I literally had to wrestle the sandwich out of Bob's hand as we walked out here.
It got violent.
You could not take the sandwich onto the show.
It got very violent.
But speaking of current events and things taking place just up on Go Local here, the North Smithfield Town Council President John Beauregard just announced that he is going to call for a special meeting on Monday and is going to put a motion to reconsider the resolution that passed.
Withdraw the resolution
Yep.
to penalize Nike for running ads by Colin Kaepernick. Which I thought was one of the silliest things I've ever seen in my life. For one thing, that's probably a First Amendment element. They could be sued about that. The other thing is, I mean, why should public agencies get involved in, this sort of thing involving a private advertising decision? And finally, this Colin character, it's not as if he was condemning the police. That's what I was saying. He was condemning police brutality and racism. And
He did wear socks. He did wear socks that showed the police looking like pigs. That I think the police very much took affront with.
He's pretty low key guy. I mean, the socks are always dangerous. We know that. You gotta watch out for your socks, the red socks, the paw socks, whatever. But I mean, he was stating his opinion about police brutality against people with his melanin content. So I think he had every right to do that. Nike obviously has every right to promote that. And apparently his endorsement of Nike and Nike's endorsement of him did not hurt them. Apparently sales are up, according to Reuters anyway. The last
I see
figure
on
I
social
saw.
media a lot of the stock performance graphs people are going to keep putting up.
I mean, the whole thing is silly. Town councils and senates and presidents should not get involved in these private business decisions.
Well, it was interesting. I spoke with John briefly on Monday.
John Beauregard?
John Beauregard before the decision was made. Spoke to the reasons why I put it forth. One thing that I did not get from him, if the town currently has any contracts with Nike. I don't know if this was a...
I thought I fuzzily recall maybe one
it?
very small one, but very little to do with Nike. So probably the net effect would have been close to zero. Anyway, close to zero. Just they should get involved in this. I'm sure he's sincere, but the use of the flag as a symbol of patriotism has always kind of gotten to me. There's no reference to a flag in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. And certainly one of the crucial things in the Constitution, our Bill of Rights, is the right of free speech. And Mr. Beauregard doesn't like what Colin did, what he said, then he can denounce it, but not in his official capacity. He shouldn't use the force of government to penalize somebody for something like that.
Well, I know this has been done.
I'm sure he's sincere.
I know this was done around the country, and there was a mayor down in Louisiana when we first wrote the piece on Monday that had put one forth and then rescinded it as well. And it was interesting, when they put it forth in North Smithfield, they made it sound, this is not anything binding. This is a request that the town not do it. But even at that request level, folks question
I mean, it is
First
the
Amendment.
town council. The town council is the ultimate arbiter of government in North Smithfield. So that's sort of silly. I think I don't know Mr. Beauregard, so I'm hard-pressed to criticize him much, but I will say that some people with the flag controversies, you recall Dr. Johnson's famous line, which is something like, a false patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels, rather. That would have been scandals, and so on. You drag in this, or you wrap yourself in a flag, instead of forgetting about the legal and cultural framework that give us liberty and rights in the United States. The flag is a physical object.
Well, we'll see if this is sort of the end of it. Monday, obviously, it'll be there. It'll be interesting to see if they're quite there's the outpouring that there was last Monday. Speaking of current events, let's get outside Rhode Island for a second. Let's talk about Brett Kavanaugh and kind of the last 72 hours.
I mean, I don't know who to believe. It's kind of he said, she said. I'm always a little bit leery of going after people, stuff that happened 36 years ago, and in my case would be, 46 or 56 years ago, whatever. One of the interesting things that came out about this was the panorama it presented of the privileged in Washington.
I know you said you really appreciated
the
this.
Beltway Bandits, all these kids at these expensive private schools, this tremendous sense of privilege, and Kavanaugh kind of indirectly referred to it in a talk in a private group a couple of years ago when he said, "What stays?" The joke, and what stays at what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. And then his sidekick, his friend way back then, Mark Judge, has written a book called Wasted, which you've probably read about.
I mean,
memoir of life in the prep school world of Washington, D.C.
You know, folks have, many folks have had heady days in their high school or college years. But
there's certain stretches I would just soon forget.
But one of the interesting facets of this, Bob, that Josh Fenton and I were talking about regarding this was initially when his accuser came forward, she was looking for some level of anonymity with the letter. And we were talking about that, about how someone could think that, and since then we've seen her come forth and say that her family's been put under a great deal of stress.
Which I'm sure they apparently have had threats.
Since coming public. But Josh and I were having a discussion.
NRA is not happy with her.
That how in this day and age someone thought that an anonymous letter or being anonymous could enter the conversation, and we harken back to the New York Times opinion.
Which again, you know my opinion on that. Don't avoid anonymous pieces. Get out there. And I'm sympathetic with her. It's terrible 100%. Having to be dragged through this stuff again. Whatever happened was unpleasant. She's clearly a sane and intelligent person. And I trust that something happened. We just don't know exactly what.
But that level of anonymity, it happens, I'll tell you here all the time, and you saw it too. Folks want to say something, bring something to light, and I have to explain, you have to be on the record because you could possibly exist or you could possibly not exist.
I used to, when I was an editor, more of a news editor, not editorial page editor, I'd hear these incredible, horrible things, and I knew they were true, but without a name, I couldn't do it. Without a source. I would not have done that at the New York Times. I'm sympathetic to this lady, especially anything involving a potential sexual crime. It's embarrassing, it's awful, it's traumatic, but you just can't do it. And she must have known in a case as, in a situation as volatile as this, involving a lifetime appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court and, of an appeals court judge and a Republican operative, that there'd be a lot of, pressure. Say the least.
Indeed. And one of the interesting facets of this back and forth is, her coming forth with this allegation and him basically saying, what did he say? He wasn't even at the party?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit vague.
There's a lot of vagary.
Yeah, there's a lot of vagary all the way around. She doesn't remember whose house it was, apparently. Mr. Judge, who was there, apparently, the author of Wasted, soon to be a major motion picture. Seemed kind of vague about it, so I don't know. Something happened. I mean, given her apparent intelligence and, so far as we know, stability, it's hard to believe that this story involving some young man would have been made out of whole cloth.
But I'll tell you as well, one of the things we talked about before coming out here was the one small little story, and I don't know who broke it on the national level, about the fact that Brett Kavanaugh's mother, in her capacity as a judge, actually ruled to foreclose.
Foreclosure, and there are a number of mysteries there.
On the accuser's family.
Because the accuser appeared to be a rich kid. She was going to Holton Arms, which is sort of a very fancy, exclusive girls' school. I think it still is in Washington. But apparently something happened financially, and the Judge Kavanaugh's mother, ruled on a bankruptcy filing. So what's that all about?
A little. I mean, I heard the reporting was that they were allowed to keep the house, but it's interesting how things end up going back. So you've got a cheat sheet to tell us what we're going to expect this weekend.
Yeah, sure. Okay, what are we going to talk about here? They're kind of maybe wacky ideas. One of the ideas that I found looking around for stuff is a suggestion by Lev Kushner, sort of a sociologist, economist, about why cities should stop chasing big companies. Offering them the stars, the moon, and the sky to move there. What they should do is subsidize freelancers who are going to be the creators, allegedly, the creators of new companies, and the future producers, subsidize them instead of giving the money through tax breaks and stuff to the likes of Amazon. Subsidize them in health care, with health care, child care.
So you're not a trickle down economic theorist.
No, more trickle up.
Trickle up economics.
Rather than giving gigantic incentives to get these big name companies that may leave after a while. And I thought that's sort of an interesting idea. Whether it would work is another interesting issue. A couple of other things. I wrote a few words about Newport, what a fascinating place it is, that you've got this mix of kind of rich broth or stew of ethnicities. You've got glamour, man-made beauty, and natural beauty, and so on. But you also have a rather venomous aspect to it, both between classes and within classes. And the best example, which is sort of still continuing, is the Welcome Center controversy.
I thought the controversy's gone.
Well, no,
they built it.
Still fascinating to me that still there are plenty of people who won't speak to each other about that. People are infuriated about people are cutting people.
The intrigue on Bellevue.
And I thought, boy, Newport would be a great place to, well, Gore Vidal's dead, unfortunately. Truman Capote's dead. That'd been great. If we could bring back Edith Wharton from the dead, that would be good. And even Tom Wolfe.
Just what wealthy people have to fight about.
It's about status. A lot of this is status. And of course, Tom Wolfe in many interviews said what Americans are most interested in about sex, money, direct cash, is status. And Newport's a great sort of zoological experiment.
You're often down there. You've got your ear to the ground. You know of these machinations down there.
I know some folks down there, and they're very nice to me. They're nicer to me than they are to each other. Often. I don't know why. It's not that they're afraid of me, unfortunately. I also talk about the gas explosions up in the north, the north of Boston, and I think it's an example of obviously decayed infrastructure. Some of these pipes were corroded. They're also putting far too much pressure, gas pressure, in these things, and who was monitoring that? But it's also a reminder, as if we knew that gas is an explosive stuff, and it's dangerous, and that wouldn't it be great if in the fullness of time, with improved battery capacity, that we could just get our energy for heating, for lighting, for everything from from regional alternative energy like solar, wind, geothermal, and so on. It'd be so much better than getting all this dangerous stuff from Pennsylvania, which is a very dangerous state. You don't have a friend in Pennsylvania. You've got a fracking salesman. So I thought this great example of kind of decayed infrastructure. And now this is fascinating debate already going on. Are the ratepayers going to pay to clean up the damage, or are the shareholders going to pay for it? And it was fascinating in another way, in the way that Governor Charlie Baker immediately took control of it and gave control of the cleanup to Eversource. He took it away from Columbia Gas and gave it Eversource to supervise. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like that.
Like a problem-solving
career, to kind of coordinate.
Said you messed up. Get out.
And another thing, I guess you could say environmental thing. Down in the Hurricane Florence, again, we've had more cases of flooding exacerbated by too many parking lots, where the water flows right into the river and causes far worse flooding than you'd have if you had porous surfaces. As they are doing around here, the best example of how they're successfully, I think, addressing this stuff is in the point in Newport, where there's, like they're using like paving stones and sand, and so there's much less runoff. But this is the kind of problem we had here with the Patuxent River and the big floods a few years back. Yes. Where the parking lots and the Warwick Mall and various other places made everything worse.
Well, what'll be interesting to see, as you know, I talked with the professor at UMass Dartmouth about this. Is the
great guy, very impressive.
Great conversation. Is the redevelopment, and the thing is, that's not as sexy as when you're watching, when the news industrial complex wants to focus on all the flooding. But
the great photo ops, with I love was it CNN, the Weather Channel, the guy leaning against the wind, and there are a couple of people in the background just strolling along.
The best was the videos making fun of that after the fact.
I know.
People throwing stuff.
Yeah, people throwing stuff. I mean, of course, everybody loves hurricanes just because the drama.
So there is the drama, but then months after years later, you know, the country forgets about the New Orleans, the Texases, you know, what the redevelopment is, and you know, do they assuage the residents and say, come back, we'll rebuild, and do they do a better job the second time around?
They just rebuild more.
Yeah.
I think there's just so much money involved. And also, I think memories get shorter and shorter with the media. Everything rolls on. So, okay, Katrina was 2005. People forget about that. The financial crash was 2008, 2009. So getting rid of regulations, which makes everything easier for companies for a while until it makes things worse. The lack of regulation. Same thing in environmental stuff.
Short memories can make for big problems.
Get rid of environmental rules, and it's certainly nice for certain kinds of companies, and everything goes along okay. Their profits are higher, and then some disaster. You know, a pig poop dam falls apart or something like that, or you have more and more people dying from air pollution. I mean, you know, it's the old Robert Frost line. Before you take down a fence, find out why it was put up in the first place.
And on that note, I always love to end on a good Whitcomb quote. Of course, read him on Sundays on Go Local, and of course, catch him on live when he's in studio. Thank you so much for coming. Okay, we'll let you go. And we're going to be right back here in the